My ex-husband left me for his mistress. 10 years later, his reaction to meeting my current husband is priceless. I am Sandra Holmes, a woman of 40 years, content in my second marriage and enjoying a life far removed from the shadows of my past. My husband, a man of unwavering kindness, has been the anchor in my storm, a steadfast presence who cherishes our monthly dates as sacred rituals, regardless of the demands on his time. He is a man of his word, a quality I've come to treasure after the turbulent waters of my first marriage. It's not that I dwell on the past, or that I spend my days comparing my present happiness to the misery I once endured. But sometimes, the contrast is so stark, the relief so profound, that I can't help but acknowledge the transformative power of leaving behind a toxic relationship. I don't regret my divorce from Jim Stone, not for a single second. Nor do I regret the leap of faith I took in marrying again, a decision that has brought me more joy than I ever thought possible. This month marks our 8th wedding anniversary, a milestone we intended to celebrate with quiet elegance. My husband, ever the thoughtful romantic, had reserved a table at a prestigious restaurant overlooking the vast expanse of the sea. The rhythmic crashing of waves against the shore, the salty tang of the ocean air, these were elements that always brought us closer, a shared appreciation for the simple beauty of nature. I envisioned a night of intimate conversation, soft music, and exquisite food, a perfect encapsulation of the harmony we had found together. But fate, it seems, had other plans. As we lingered over the last of our dessert, savoring the final moments of our celebratory dinner, I caught sight of a figure I had hoped never to see again. It was Jim, my ex-husband, a ghost from a decade ago, a painful reminder of a life I had thankfully left behind. My husband excused himself to visit the restroom, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the breathtaking ocean vista. I gazed out the window, lost in the gentle sway of the waves, each crest and fall mirroring the ebb and flow of my own life's journey. I reminisced about the countless times my husband and I had shared similar moments, finding solace and connection in the shared appreciation of the natural world. We had built our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect, open communication, and shared dreams, a stark contrast to the fractured foundation of my previous marriage. Suddenly, a voice, sharp and laced with sarcasm, shattered the tranquility of my reverie. Well, what's so beautiful? Do you think a regular ocean appears nice to someone broke like you? I turned, my heart sinking as I met the condescending gaze of Jim Stone. He stood there, a smirk playing on his lips, his eyes filled with a mixture of amusement and contempt. Jim, I breathed, my voice barely above a whisper. Long time no see. Indeed, he replied, his tone dripping with condescension. Why are you here, in a place like this? He gestured around the opulent dining room, as if questioning my right to be present. Why, I'm the one who should be asking you that, I retorted, a flicker of annoyance rising within me. His presence felt like a stain on the otherwise perfect evening, a jarring reminder of the emotional baggage I had worked so hard to unpack and discard. Undeterred, Jim pulled out the chair my husband had vacated and settled in, his eyes fixed on me as if I were some amusing specimen under his microscope. Yes, he drawled, his gaze lingering on my face. Those eyes. I put up with those eyes for a whole decade of our marriage. Never thought I'd run into you here. Can someone like you, who doesn't have much money, really eat at a fancy place like this? Can you even afford it? Or are you here for a once-in-a-lifetime thing? It's our wedding anniversary, I stated simply, refusing to rise to his bait. The joy of the evening, however, was slowly being eroded by his venomous presence. Ah, I see, he sneered. Poor people can only come to places like this on anniversaries. Huh? I come here often, you know? He leaned back in his chair, a smug expression plastered on his face. You're still pathetic, aren't you? Isn't there someone with you? Yes, there is, I replied, my patience wearing thin. I just sent him to the restroom. Ah, I see, Jim said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Handling money is a woman's job, isn't it? His words stung, a reminder of the outdated and misogynistic views he had always held. Just then, a woman approached our table, her face etched with lines of weariness and discontent. It was the same woman Jim had flaunted as his lover 10 years ago, the catalyst for the demise of our marriage. Time had not been kind to her. Her once vibrant beauty had faded, replaced by a haggard look that spoke of hardship and disillusionment. I could only imagine the life she had endured alongside Jim, his constant criticisms and belittling remarks chipping away at her self-worth. "You're still wearing shabby clothes, aren't you?" Jim remarked, his gaze sweeping over me with disdain. "Aren't you embarrassed to dress so poorly?" His words were like daggers, aimed at piercing the armor of confidence I had carefully constructed over the years. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me, the remnants of my past threatening to pull me under. I desperately searched for my husband, hoping his presence would dispel the dark cloud that had settled over the table. And there he was, emerging from the restroom, his eyes fixed on me with a mixture of concern and confusion. He had witnessed the exchange, the tension palpable even from a distance. He approached us, his demeanor calm but firm. "Excuse me," he said, addressing Jim directly. "Do you need something from my wife?" Jim's eyes widened in surprise, his gaze shifting from me to my husband. "Your wife? This woman is your wife?" he sputtered, his voice laced with disbelief. "Yes," my husband replied, his tone unwavering. "What do you need?" Jim's eyes narrowed, his gaze sweeping over my husband's attire. "You also look poor," he sneered. "I guess poor women always remarry poor men." His words were laced with venom, a pathetic attempt to diminish us both. "Please don't be rude," I interjected, my voice trembling slightly. "My husband is a very respectable man." Jim let out a derisive snort. "Humph, you must be just a useless, broke man then." He glared at my husband, his eyes burning with resentment. It was clear that he hadn't changed at all, still clinging to his warped worldview where wealth and status were the sole measures of a person's worth. Jim's arrogance was legendary. He had always carried himself with an air of superiority, despite his questionable competence. He worked for a major corporation, the Holmes Group, but his rise through the ranks was more a testament to his skill in sucking up to his superiors than any genuine talent or hard work. He was a master manipulator, adept at shifting blame onto his subordinates and taking credit for their achievements. I had witnessed firsthand his Machiavellian tactics, the way he charmed his way into favor while simultaneously undermining those beneath him. How he managed to climb the corporate ladder was a mystery, but by the time we divorced, he had somehow attained the position of manager. He constantly boasted about his supposed elite status, his graduation from a prestigious university a recurring theme in his self-aggrandizing narratives. "Not just any university," he would often declare, "but a very different kind from the ordinary ones." When we were dating, I had been naive enough to believe his exaggerated stories, impressed by his purported intellect. But marriage had peeled back the layers of pretense, revealing the shallowness beneath. His intelligence was a carefully constructed facade, a thin veneer covering a core of insecurity and self-doubt. His true talent lay in his ability to degrade and demean those he perceived as beneath him. He constantly belittled me for my lack of a college degree, reminding me at every opportunity that I had only completed high school. "Your parents were too poor to send you to university, right?" he would sneer. "But it's good for you. You didn't have the brains for it anyway. If your family had been rich, you would have had to go to university. But it would have been impossible for someone as stupid as you." His comments stung, not because they were true, but because they were so far removed from reality. My family wasn't poor. We simply valued practicality and hard work over accumulating material possessions. I had chosen to enter the workforce after high school, eager to contribute and gain experience. My decision was a reflection of my independence and ambition, not a consequence of financial hardship. He criticized my cooking, my cleaning, my inability to bear children, a failure he attributed solely to me, conveniently ignoring the emotional toll his constant criticisms had taken on my health and well-being. He saw women as domestic servants, their value measured solely by their ability to cater to his needs and bolster his ego. "You really can't do anything right," he would often lament. "You're bad at cooking, you can't clean, and you can't even have kids. Marrying you was a huge mistake." His words were like poison, slowly seeping into my soul and eroding my self-worth. My family had always emphasized the importance of frugality, of making the most of what we had. I had been raised to appreciate the simple things in life, to find joy in the everyday moments that often went unnoticed. But Jim saw my thriftiness as a sign of poverty, a source of shame and embarrassment. One evening, I prepared a simple meal using radish leaves, a common practice in my family. Jim, upon seeing the dish, flew into a rage. "Are you trying to feed me trash?" he yelled, sweeping the plate onto the floor. "This is garbage." That incident, seemingly insignificant on its own, became a symbol of the vast chasm that separated us. We came from different worlds, with different values and different perspectives on life. The realization that we were fundamentally incompatible hit me with the force of a tidal wave. The final blow came when Jim casually informed me of his affair. He had found a younger woman, someone he deemed more suitable to his elevated status. He pushed for a divorce, arguing that it was in his best interest to remarry a younger, more vibrant woman. He presented his infidelity as a logical next step, a necessary upgrade in his pursuit of a more fulfilling life. I didn't fight him. In fact, I embraced the opportunity to escape his suffocating grip. I signed the divorce papers with a sense of relief, eager to begin a new chapter in my life, free from the constant barrage of his criticisms and the weight of his expectations. The divorce was not a tragedy. It was a liberation. "Who is this man, Sandra?" my husband asked gently, his voice filled with concern as he observed the tense exchange between Jim and me. "My ex-husband, Jim Stone," I replied, the name leaving a bitter taste in my mouth. I had shared the painful details of my first marriage with my husband early in our relationship. I had recounted the constant criticisms, the emotional abuse, the crushing weight of Jim's expectations. I had shared my story with tears and trembling hands, reliving the trauma of those 10 years. My husband had listened patiently, offering words of comfort and support, never judging or minimizing my experience. When I had finished, he simply held me close and whispered, "Let's be happy from now on." And we had been happy. We had built a life together based on mutual respect, open communication, and shared dreams. We had found solace in each other's company, creating a sanctuary where we could be our authentic selves, free from judgment and pretense. Jim, however, seemed determined to disrupt our hard-earned peace. He continued his barrage of insults, his assumptions about my husband's financial status as misguided as his assessment of my own worth. "So, you're also a broke man, huh?" he sneered, directing his venom towards my husband. "Marrying a poor person means you're broke too. Am I right? But why did you divorce such a wonderful person?" "Wonderful," I scoffed, incredulous. "Your eyes must be fooling you. Truly wonderful means having a beautiful wife like mine." He gestured towards his current wife, the woman who had once been his mistress, who now stood beside him, her face etched with a mixture of embarrassment and resentment. "She's beautiful, isn't she?" he boasted, oblivious to the irony of his words. "She's actually my boss's daughter. Marrying the boss's daughter definitely helps one climb the career ladder faster." He turned his attention back to my husband, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. "Marrying a broke woman like you probably means you're just a regular employee. Too bad. A regular employee. I haven't heard that word in years. What are you trying to prove? Bottom-tier guy marrying a bottom-tier woman. It just means you'll both be broke for the rest of your lives. And you think you deserve to eat in such a fancy restaurant like this?" My husband remained calm, his expression unreadable. "Well," he replied, his voice smooth and even, "this level of restaurant isn't a problem for us." Just then, a waiter passed by our table. My husband, with a subtle gesture, produced a black card from his wallet and handed it to the waiter, instructing him to settle the bill. Jim's eyes widened, his attempt to conceal his surprise failing miserably. Is that a black card? He stammered, his voice tinged with disbelief. Showing off a card like that here? You're not used to it, are you? You must have borrowed it from someone. Showing off by flashing the card. But later you'll have to pay back the person who lent you that card, right? I can imagine you're scared to splash the cash in such a place. It's all part of your act. My husband simply smiled, his eyes twinkling with amusement. Funny thing to say, he replied calmly. Who would lend their card, I wonder? No matter how naive someone is, they wouldn't lend their card. How would you know that, Jim? I interjected, my voice laced with sarcasm. You shouldn't say such insulting things. What's insulting? Jim retorted, his face flushing with anger. I'm just stating the truth. There's no way you could be wealthy if you married a poor woman like her. My wife is poor, you say? My husband asked, his voice dangerously low. Yes, that's right, Jim replied, his confidence unwavering. Her folks' place is a rundown, one-floor home, you know that, right? Or maybe you were too embarrassed to visit her home, so you went to a family restaurant instead. Meeting her parents at a family restaurant for a marriage proposal is unheard of. But for poor people like you, it's probably the norm. Family restaurant, huh? The fact that you thought of that means you must have done your greeting there, right? If you hadn't experienced it yourself, you wouldn't have thought of it. What are you talking about? My husband asked, his voice laced with amusement. I'm not short on money. I wouldn't do such a miserly thing. Yet you came up with it, Jim insisted, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. I never would have thought of that, right, Sandra? Well, I replied, a mischievous glint in my eyes. I think I'd like to go to a family restaurant occasionally, but we rarely get the chance. Exactly, Jim exclaimed, his voice triumphant. You're lying. When you were with me, you were happy to go to family restaurants. That's because I had never really been to one before, I replied, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Oh, I bet, Jim scoffed. You sure talk big. Coming to such a fancy restaurant just makes you want to act all important. Maybe that's you. It seems like you don't fit in this kind of place. He paused, his eyes sweeping over my husband with disdain. What, you seem out of place, don't you think? There's no way I'm out of place. You're the one who doesn't fit in here. Do you even know who I am? Why would I know you? My husband replied, his voice calm and collected. If you want me to remember you, just become famous. I am well known, though, Jim boasted, puffing out his chest. Well, it's impossible for a regular employee like you to know me, I guess. What? I'm a manager, not a regular employee, Jim exclaimed, his voice rising in indignation. Manager? My husband repeated, his tone laced with amusement. Yes, how about that? Impressive, isn't it? At that moment, the restaurant's chauffeur approached our table, his demeanor polite and professional. Sir, he addressed my husband, your car is ready. Jim's eyes widened in surprise, his earlier bravado faltering. Huh? What's going on? He stammered. Oh, well, you're probably just the president of some small company. I work for a major corporation, the Holmes Group, and I'm a manager there. Oh, you're still just a manager? My husband replied, his voice laced with amusement. Excuse me, Jim sputtered. You consider yourself top tier, but staying as a manager at your age won't bring any advancement. What? Jim stammered, his face paling. This man works at our company? Yes, the chauffeur confirmed, his eyes fixed on Jim with a mixture of pity and amusement. He's been with our company for a long time. What do you mean our company? Jim demanded, his voice rising in panic. You talk big, but you're just an office lady from a small company. That's right, I replied calmly. I don't have kids or any reason to quit my job. But, so you can't have kids? Jim sputtered, his eyes widening in disbelief. I was right. You can't have kids. Something's wrong with you. Hey. My husband interjected, his voice firm but controlled. There's a limit to how rude you can be. Sandra is perfectly fine. If she's fine, why can't she get pregnant? Jim demanded, his voice shrill with desperation. Women are supposed to have kids. I don't need to explain that to you. You can't say it because it would prove there's something wrong with her. This man is hopeless. My husband sighed, shaking his head. Yes, so bad. It's beyond saving. This man's name is Jim Stone. Yes, I understand, the chauffeur replied, his voice impassive. Asterisk, he's fired star. Sandra, please contact HR. What? Jim shrieked, his face contorted in disbelief. What are you saying? Trying to shock me? With that? What company's president are you? Thinking you can fool me with such an obvious act? Are you stupid? My husband smiled, his eyes twinkling with amusement. Jim, he said calmly, my name is Harold Holmes. I am the president of the Holmes Group. And this, he gestured towards me, is my wife, Sandra Holmes, the vice president of our company. Jim stared at us, his face ashen, his eyes wide with disbelief. The chauffeur, with a pitying glance at Jim, nodded in confirmation. What? Seriously? Jim stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. Is he really our president? Yes, the chauffeur replied, his voice firm and unwavering. And she, he gestured towards me, is his wife and the vice president of our company. What? Jim whispered, his voice barely audible. That's ridiculous. How could Sandra, from a poor family, end up as vice president with just a high school diploma? Such things don't matter, I replied calmly. Whether someone graduated from high school or college doesn't determine their worth. That's ridiculous, Jim stammered, his mind clearly struggling to process the information. I will never forgive anyone who insults my wife, my husband stated firmly, his voice dangerously. No. There's a union, Jim stammered, grasping at straws. Yes, there is a union. The union will protect us employees. You're a manager, right? Managers are not union members, so you are not protected by the union. Didn't you know that? My husband retorted, a smirk playing on his lips. Seriously, Jim whispered, his voice barely audible. He looked utterly defeated, the wind knocked out of his sails. Well, my husband continued, his voice laced with amusement, you better brace yourself. Since you insulted my wife, you must face the consequences. Jim sat there, stunned and speechless, the realization of his predicament slowly sinking in. My husband, seeing no further need for conversation, turned to me and asked, Shall we go, my dear? I nodded, my heart filled with a mixture of satisfaction and pity for the man who had once held so much power over me. We left the restaurant, leaving Jim alone with his shattered ego and the impending consequences of his actions. That night, perhaps fueled by a combination of panic and regret, Jim called my cell phone. His tone was drastically different from the arrogance he had displayed earlier, replaced by a desperate plea for forgiveness. Sandra, he began, his voice trembling slightly. It's been a while. What do you mean? I replied coolly. We already had a talk this afternoon. Ah, yes, he stammered. What can I do for you? Your dismissal hasn't been issued yet, I stated simply. Ah, he hesitated. You guys were just joking, right? Huh? What do you mean about you being the vice president and your husband being the president? No, I replied firmly. They're all true. I'm surprised you don't know who your own company's president and vice president are. Why would you be the vice president, though? He asked, his voice laced with disbelief. Because the best way I can help my husband is from the vice president's position, I replied calmly. No, but it's strange, Jim insisted. Why would a high school graduate be the vice president? It's not strange at all, I replied. I only graduated high school because I wanted to start working early, but after we separated, I acquired a college degree. Huh? Really? Jim asked, his voice tinged with surprise. Yes, I replied. There are schools you can attend online. So you really are the president's wife? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Yes, I replied simply. How did you manage to marry the president? He asked, his voice filled with disbelief. When did you get married? We got married after I divorced you, I replied. I met the president soon after, and we dated for about 2 years before getting married. Married, Jim repeated, his voice filled with confusion. Why would the president take an interest in someone like you? Stop being so rude, I snapped, my patience wearing thin. Oh, sorry, Jim stammered. Connections are mysterious, aren't they? I just happened to meet the president. Even so, Jim continued, his voice laced with suspicion. Why would he marry someone broke like you? Is he a philanthropist? No one marries for charity, I retorted. If he's not a philanthropist, did he marry you to make you his slave? It's odd otherwise. Maybe today you got lucky to be taken to a fancy restaurant, but usually you must be having plain, poor meals, right? And living a difficult life where you can't even buy what you like. Am I right? Why would you think that? I asked, my voice laced with amusement. That's not true at all, I continued. You're the only one who would do such a thing. There's no way you could marry such a rich man. Why do you think so? Rich people have connections with politicians and other wealthy people, Jim explained, his voice filled with a strange mixture of envy and resentment. If a poorly raised woman like you shows up at their parties, it would embarrass the president. Or maybe he lets his mistress attend those instead. You're making wild assumptions, I replied, my voice laced with annoyance. If you keep looking down on me like this, you'll truly regret it. I'm just concerned for you, Jim insisted, his voice dripping with false concern. A woman with a poor upbringing like you marrying a rich man like the president will only suffer. A regular employee's husband would suit you better. Marrying someone richer than you must be a foolish woman who can't see ahead. Who's the fool here? I retorted, my patience wearing thin. If you called just to say that, I'm hanging up. No, wait, Jim pleaded. I'm not trying to look down on you. It's just true that you come from poverty. That can't be helped. Thinking I'm looking down on you for that is completely wrong. You say I come from a poor family, but my father is wealthy. Your family is poorer than mine. I didn't say it back then because of your pride. Your family home isn't even half the size of mine. Your father is just a department head, and you're still just a manager. That's not true, I replied calmly. When you proposed to me, you were living in a small, single-story house. That was because we were renovating our home, Jim exclaimed. We had stored all our belongings elsewhere. It was just a temporary residence. No need to move to a big house. I quoted his mother's words back to him, my voice laced with sarcasm. That can't be true, Jim insisted. You don't have to believe it, I replied. But since the renovation is finished, even if you say you want to visit my parents at home, you've stubbornly refused to go again. I couldn't tell you the truth. Who would visit such a poor, run-down house? You really are hopeless, Jim sighed, his voice filled with resignation. Then I'll send you a picture, I said, my voice laced with amusement. This is my family home. You'll see from the picture. The photo I sent was of a sprawling mansion, a testament to my family's true wealth and status. That's my house, Jim stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. I lived there for a while after our divorce? What? That can't be true, he exclaimed, his voice rising in disbelief. It's true, I replied calmly. If this is true, then why were you working as an office lady in a small company? If you're so rich, you wouldn't need to work. And if you did work, wouldn't it be at a large corporation? Indeed, I replied, my voice laced with amusement. My father is the president of a major company. That company was a new one he started. When it was time to decide who would be the president, it was decided that my brother would take the role. So I volunteered to handle the administrative work. Now that company has advanced to the top of the industry. Is that true? Were you really so rich? Jim asked, his voice barely audible. Yes, I replied. This is the truth. This is the real me, the one you used to look down So that's why you could marry the president? Jim asked, his voice tinged with envy. That's not it, I replied. I met the president because we shared the same hobbies. We met through our hobbies and hit it off. He didn't know I was the daughter of a wealthy family, and I didn't know he was the president. So you are at the company where I work because of that? Jim asked, his voice filled with confusion. How long have you been at that company? I joined the company right after our divorce, I replied. I had a connection by chance. Why? When you were with me, you were a clerk at your brother's company. And after we divorced, you changed jobs. That's right, I replied. My brother's company has grown so much, and he told me it was time to do what I loved. So I thought I might as well pursue what I've always wanted to do. Then, just as a senior position became vacant, they headhunted me. But at that stage, I still had no acquaintance with the president. He was still someone high above. I don't understand, Jim said, his voice filled with frustration. How can you have connections like that? So rich people just connect with other rich people. That's why I'm saying those things don't matter. Why do you think like that? It's because of that mindset that you're still just a manager, I replied, my voice laced with amusement. I wonder why your wife hasn't gotten tired of you yet. She can't get tired of me, Jim exclaimed. I'm supporting her. Keep it up with that attitude, and you'll get what's coming to you, I warned him. Anyway, that's the situation, so stop belittling me already. I wasn't trying to belittle you, Jim insisted. I really thought you were poor. About that dismissal you mentioned this afternoon? Oh yes, I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Your dismissal. After all the mocking you did, it's only natural you'd be dismissed. That would make me in a tough